What if we thought about addiction differently? Not just as, a failure or a disease even, but maybe something else.
Something like an invader.
Yeah, exactly. Something that kind of takes hold, hijacks you.
It's definitely a challenging way to look at it, maybe a bit unsettling at first.
Yeah.
But the source material we've been looking at, addiction as a parasite, suggests this analogy. Well, it can actually bring a lot of clarity, maybe even reduce some of the shame around it.
Right. And that's really what we want to dig into today. This whole idea, this analogy from addiction as a parasite.
Yeah.
Our goal is to unpack it. What does it mean? How does it help make sense of the sheer complexity of addiction?
And what insights does it give us for understanding, for compassion, maybe even for healing?
Exactly. We'll touch on the personal feeling, that sense of being controlled, but also bring in some psychology, sociology.
Yeah.
See how they shed light on this parasitic kind of dynamic. Hopefully by the end, you'll have this different lens. Maybe it offers some validation if you've been through it, or helps you understand someone else better, and points towards, reclaiming your own power.
Sounds good. Let's get into it.
Okay.
So let's start with the core concept from the source. The idea is to think of addiction not as something wrong inside the person, fundamentally, but more like something foreign, like a parasite that's attached itself to the person.
Okay, like a biological one, something living off a host, taking what it needs.
Precisely, that biological sense, yeah. But applied metaphorically, psychologically, emotionally.
Right.
The writing describes this addiction parasite feeding off the host, but it's not physical food, obviously. It's feeding on emotional stuff, pain, loneliness, trauma, shame, unmet needs.
Ah, okay. So it thrives where there's already some kind of wound or vulnerability?
That's exactly their idea. It exploits those weak spots, places where the host is already hurting or lacking something essential emotionally. The source really stresses that it doesn't just appear randomly. It needs that existing distress.
That makes sense. So it suggests the addiction isn't really the root problem. It's secondary.
Right. It crops up because of something deeper. And at first, the source says, this parasite can be pretty subtle.
Like a whisper.
Yeah, just offering a quick bit of relief from whatever that underlying pain is. Could be a substance, sure, but also a behavior, even an emotional pattern. But over time, it starts to influence choices. Quietly, persistently.
Nudging the person towards whatever feeds it.
Exactly. It learns what works the next hit, the drink, the compulsion, the escape, and it steers the host's energy that way. It creates this really powerful pull, often deceptive.
Deceptive how?
Well, the source mentions it whispering that relief is just around the corner. Just one more time, always pulling the host back in.
And that's where the hijacking idea really comes in, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the person, the host, they're still there.
Right.
They have moments of clarity. Their own will exists. But it feels like it gets swamped as the parasite gets stronger.
Totally. The source uses this image being pulled into a fast river.
Okay.
You, the host, you might be desperately trying to walk upstream, make different choices, fight that pull, but every single step is exhausting, it's painful. This massive force is just dragging you down.
Yeah, that river analogy, that's strong. It really hits home that it's not about lacking willpower.
No.
It's about the sheer force they're up against.
Exactly. It shifts the question from why can't they stop to look at the incredible force they're fighting. And this fight, driven by the parasite's needs, can lead to behaviors that seem totally out of character.
Like lying, hurting people.
Yeah. And the source connects this painful stuff to psychological ideas, like Carl Jung's concept of the shadow.
Shadow. Like the hidden darker parts of us, the stuff we push down.
Yes, precisely that. Jung saw it as the unknown, often negative side. Addiction, acting like this invader, can kind of drag that shadow out into the open through these actions.
So those behaviors aren't the real person, the host.
They're more like symptoms, agonizing symptoms, of someone whose basic needs aren't met and who's now being driven by the parasite's desperate survival logic. Not the whole person, no.
So healing, then.
Yeah.
It has to involve facing that shadow. Looking at those uncomfortable bits, not to judge, but to see where the parasite got its leverage.
Exactly. Shine a light on the hidden vulnerabilities, the conflicts it's been exploiting. And, the source also links this analogy to the disease model of addiction.
How does that fit?
Well, the disease model shows that chronic use or behavior actually changes the brain physically. It messes with impulse control, decision-making, the pleasure-reward pathways. The source suggests this isn't just like the parasite. It's the parasite literally rewiring the brain to serve its own needs.
Making cravings stronger, resistance weaker.
Yes. So it's a biological restructuring, reinforcing the psychological pull. It becomes deeply embedded, like fighting a physical tide too.
Right.
And then you have people like Dr. Gabor Maté, whose work is mentioned in the source.
Yeah, I know his work.
He adds another layer. He really emphasizes that addiction often isn't about seeking pleasure, primarily. It's about seeking relief.
Relief from pain? What kind of pain?
The pain of disconnection, trauma, abandonment, feeling unseen, unsafe. The addiction, the parasite, it settles into that deep suffering, often stuff we don't even acknowledge.
A coping mechanism, but a destructive one.
Maladaptive one, yeah. Trying to numb the unbearable. And the source suggests this frame really shifts the focus.
From what's wrong with the person.
To what happened to them. Exactly. It moves away from blame and towards understanding the root vulnerability. The parasite thrives because the host is in pain and doesn't have healthier ways to cope or connect.
Okay, so we've got the internal stuff, psychological, biological, but the source brings in society too, right? Sociological angles.
Yes, and this is really fascinating. Sociological theories show addiction isn't just personal. Our environment shapes it, like symbolic interactionism.
That's about labels, right?
Yeah.
How we see ourselves based on how others see us.
Spot on. So if society constantly labels someone addict,
That label's stick.
it can be incredibly powerful, yeah. The source suggests society's judgment, the stigma, can almost act like another external parasitic force.
Wow.
If you're constantly treated as an addict, you might internalize it. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, making it harder to break free because that social identity feeds the internal parasite's patterns.
The stigma itself actually makes things worse.
Yeah.
It becomes part of the problem.
It can, yeah. It creates this hostile environment for healing and connection, the very things needed to fight back. And the source also mentions strain theory.
Okay, what's that?
Basically, it suggests that when people are blocked from achieving societal goals, success, stability through normal means, they feel strain. Yeah. And that strain can lead to, well, deviance or finding other ways to cope, sometimes destructive ones.
And the parasite, the addiction, could be one of those destructive coping methods. Feeding on the frustration, the feeling of being shut out.
Absolutely. It can become a strategy to deal with the strain of poverty, inequality, discrimination, feeling excluded. The parasite exploits the pain these social forces create.
And then Foucault's ideas about power and control. The source brings him in too.
Right. Foucault talked about how institutions label and control people who don't fit the norm. The source suggests society often reacts to addiction with punishment, jail, more stigma.
Instead of empathy and support.
Exactly. And those systems, in their punitive way, almost mirror the parasite controlling people who are already struggling, not addressing root causes or helping them heal. They can actually keep the conditions going that make the host vulnerable.
That really highlights how much we need a shift in how we view and handle addiction. Less punishment, more understanding, compassion, real support.
It really does. Which brings us back to the person's own power in all this, because even with these forces, the source is clear. The host isn't powerless. It references Gary Zukav's work, especially authentic power.
Authentic power, how does that help fight the parasite?
Zukav sees it not as controlling others, but as aligning your personality with your soul. Deep self-awareness, taking emotional responsibility, living intentionally.
Okay.
The source views addiction through this parasite lens as this intense, painful call to develop that authentic power, a sign that your alignment is off.
That's quite a reframe. Not a sign of weakness, but maybe a catalyst for growth.
Exactly. And the source points to a specific Zukav quote, something like, "Saying you can't resist is often a way of seeking permission to disconnect from your power."
Oof. That sounds a bit harsh, maybe. Like blaming.
It could, if you take it that way, but the source presents it more as an observation. Where do we put our focus? It's trying to spark the idea that choice is possible, even when the river feels overwhelming. That capacity for authentic power, for choice, it's still there, even if it feels buried deep.
And that connects to Bandura's idea of self-efficacy, right?
Right.
Believing you can actually affect things in your life.
Yes, definitely. When you use the parasite metaphor in recovery, emphasizing the host's inherent strength, their capacity to heal that directly builds back that vital sense of self-efficacy, it fights that feeling of being totally helpless.
So how do you start? How do you starve the parasite
Right.
and get that power back?
Well, the source suggests recovery, seen this way, is about two things: starving the parasite and nourishing the host.
Okay.
Building up strength consciously, restoring choice. Reconnecting with people, actively nourishing yourself emotionally, physically, spiritually.
And dealing with those root causes we talked about earlier, the pain,
Yeah,
trauma.
absolutely. Got to address the conditions that let the parasite in. The source mentions things like mindfulness, CBT.
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
Right, tools that fit this perfectly. Mindfulness helps you notice the thoughts, the feelings, the triggers. See when the parasite's influence, the urge, is trying to pull you back.
So you can observe it, not just get swept away.
Exactly. Learn to see the impulse without just automatically reacting. And CBT helps you challenge the thought patterns, the beliefs that fuel the cycle, the justifications, the self-blame, developing new ways to think and respond that don't feed it.
It sounds like recovery isn't just about stopping something bad, removing the parasite,
Right.
but actively building up the host's, like immune system, making the person stronger from the inside.
That's a great way to put it. Building resilience, genuine connections, finding purpose, self-compassion. These are the things that create an environment where the parasite just can't thrive. But the source does bring up something important and often difficult. What can remain even after a lot of healing? This idea of the parasitic egg.
Ah, right. That lingering pull, the old pathways, the memory.
Exactly. The source doesn't frame it as failure, though. It's more like a reminder that the vulnerability, the potential for it to resurface, might always be there to some degree.
So it's not proof you haven't healed.
No, just a reality of the ongoing journey. Knowing that potential exists means you stay aware, vigilant, consciously choosing every day to nurture the conditions that keep it dormant, stop it from hatching again.
So if someone relapses, it's not necessarily a moral failing. Maybe the egg got triggered by new stress, or maybe neglecting self-care.
That feels a lot more compassionate, doesn't it? It validates how hard it is, that fighting something so deeply embedded isn't simple or linear.
Yeah.
And it reinforces why ongoing self-care, connection, vigilance, why they're all so crucial long-term. But ultimately, the metaphor, the way the source explores it, it points back to hope. The host is powerful. Treatments can work. And by focusing on the root causes the pain, the disconnection, the trauma, the social stuff, the host makes the ground infertile for the parasite.
Yeah, it becomes less about a constant battle with an enemy and more about cultivating your own internal landscape, making it a place where that enemy just can't survive, reclaiming yourself, not just from the substance or behavior, but from the underlying stuff that made you vulnerable. You are not the parasite. You are the host. You do hold the power to heal.
It really is a profound way to shift thinking, away from shame and powerlessness towards understanding, self-compassion, and taking back your agency.
So we've just spent this time looking at addiction through this lens of a parasite, how it works, what it feeds on, the psychological and social angles, and what it means for healing and recovery.
Yeah, unpacking that analogy.
And it really drives home that core message from the source. You are the host, not the parasite. You have the power within you to heal, to strengthen yourself.
And remembering, with this view, recovery is active. It's about nourishing those conditions, connection, purpose, self-compassion, where that parasitic force just struggles to survive. It's about facing those root causes.
Thinking about that idea of the parasitic egg, the potential that might linger, here's something to maybe reflect on. What's one small thing, one daily intention you could set, starting right now, to consciously nourish your own strength and well-being? Maybe related to addiction, maybe something else entirely where you feel a struggle or a pull. Just one small action today to make that inner ground less fertile for anything that drains you.
That's a good reflection point. And if you want to explore these ideas further, check out Dr. Gabor Maté on trauma, Carl Jung on the shadow, Gary Zukav on authentic power.
Or look into sociological ideas like symbolic interactionism or strain theory.
Exactly. Lots to dig into.
We hope this deep dive gave you a different perspective, maybe something resonated with your own experience or that of someone you care about. Take some time this week, maybe just reflect on